If we want to start using additional packages that aren't distributed with Python, we should think about how we're going to keep things organized and compartmentalized. Python uses a concept called environments. An environment is a kind of container in which a Python program runs, and it includes basically a Python interpreter and whatever various packages you've installed. By default, your interpreter is using what's called a global environment. And unless you've already created something else, then that's what you've been using to this point. Any packages you install are going to be in that global environment, and they'll be accessible to any code that you run in that default context. That sounds appealing, and it can be, but if you start to have a lot of different projects, that global environment can start to get pretty cluttered, and you can run into programs if you have code, for example, that relies on a really specific version of a package, but then you install a newer version of that package for some other project that you're working on. So to help prevent this or to help manage this, Python can also be run in a local environment. There are two kinds of local environments. We're only concerned with one, and that's called a virtual environment. And it works by making a folder on your computer that contains a copy of or a link to the interpreter. And when you install packages, they go into this folder and they're only seen by that virtual interpreter. That makes it kind of sandboxed off from everything else. You can have as many virtual environments as you want. And the best practice is to create one for each project that you work on, or at least to create one whenever you plan to install packages. Virtual environments are a feature of Python, not VS Code. And in this video, I'm going to be using VS Code to manage mine, but I'll put some links in Canvas to some additional resources so you can see how to do this from just a terminal or command line. Virtual environments, like I said, they live in a folder in our file system. So let's start by creating a folder for this work. I'm going to be in Finder because I'm on a Mac. You might be in File Explorer for Windows. And the abbreviation we typically use for a virtual environment is VENV. So I'm going to call this folder VENV practice, VENV_practice. And now I want to open that folder in VS Code. I'm just going to drag and drop it over there. You can also go to File, Open Folder, and get it that way. And I'll close this Welcome tab. When we have a Python file open, VS Code will show us information about the current environment. So let's go ahead and create a file. I'll call this one test.py. Once VS Code recognizes that we have a Python file open, it will display our current environment down here in the bottom right corner. It's showing me the version number of the Python interpreter that I'm using. And if I had a virtual environment active, that would be displayed right at the end. I don't have one active, so it doesn't say anything else. I can also confirm this by looking at the terminal. So I'm going to go to the terminal menu and select New Terminal. You can also get a terminal just by running your file, even if it's empty, that will open one. And I'm going to look at my command prompt. Now, I can see at the end of it, it says VENV_practice. That's the name of the folder that I have open. So that's the only reason it displays that. On the left-hand side of mine, it also shows base. Now, I have something called Anaconda installed on my computer. You may or may not have that. It's the only reason it's displaying base here. So that part might not be there on yours. But what I'm really looking for is on the very left an indication that I'm using a virtual environment. Again, there's nothing about that there, and you'll see the difference once we create one. When we do want to create a new virtual environment, I have a couple different ways I can get there. So I can click on this indication of the environment I'm in, and up at the top I can click Create Virtual Environment. The other way I can get there, or another way I can get there, is through what we call the command palette. So if I click on that gear down in the bottom left and go to the command palette, and if I just start typing Create Environment, one of the choices is going to be Python Create Environment. And either way, it gets you to this same spot. Some people just like the command palette. And it's given me the option to choose which environment type I want. As I mentioned, I have Conda installed, and a Conda environment is another kind of environment. All we care about for the moment is a virtual environment, a VENV. So I'm going to select that one. And now it's going to let me choose the interpreter that I want to use for this environment. And this will just depend on how many versions of Python you have installed, how many times you've updated maybe. I'm actually out of date at the moment. I need to update mine, but I won't worry about that at the moment. In any case, the most recent one is indicated to be the global environment. So this is the one that I'm using whenever I just am working in that global environment. And that's probably the one I want to use now. I just want to use whatever the most recent one is. So yours hopefully is more recent than mine. But I'll go ahead and select that. It's going to grind away at creating that. What it's actually doing is creating this folder up here called .venv. And that's the folder for our virtual environment. It takes a moment to set all that up. It's got to copy over a bunch of stuff. Now, mine has automatically selected that environment. Yours might pop up a little message here asking you if you want to select that one, and you can just say yes. And sure enough, I can now see in my environment display here this .venv, that's the folder, and it is a virtual environment, so it's named as such. And my terminal actually is now updated and shows that as well. Depending on the steps you went through, you might still have your old terminal window up and it might still show the global environment. So you can always kill that and open a new one just to make sure. And there it is, .venv. So it is telling me that I am in that virtual environment. Notice that if I now click on that button to select an environment, I have more options. I have the global environment. I still have Conda as an option, which you probably don't have. But then I've also got my new virtual environment up there. It's recognizing that this folder I have open offers a virtual environment, and so it recommends that I use that, and there's no reason why I wouldn't in this case, so I'll just leave that the way it is. The point of a virtual environment is that I can now install all kinds of different packages without impacting any of my other projects or any of my other work. To install a Python package, we usually use a tool called PIP, P-I-P. By default, PIP gets packages from a repository that's called PyPI, that's P-Y-P-I. And if we go to their website, which is pypi.org, we can find a web interface that gives us a way to search and find out about all kinds of packages that have been published. Some of them are by big organizations written by professional programmers, and many of the packages that are published are just by regular programmers like you and me. If you ever want to, you can publish your own package there, and other programmers would be able to download and install it just as easily as what we're going to do with some of their packages. So we can search here, and for example, I know that there's one called NumPy that's a very popular package with some math functionality. And if I search for that, I get a bunch of different results, but that top one is the most recent version. I can tell by the date. If I click on that and go to the NumPy page, I get all kinds of information about the package and even information on how I can contribute to it if I want. And up at the top, it tells us the command for installing that with pip. It's even got a little copy to clipboard thing in case you don't want to have to type it. Now I'm lazy, but even I'm not that lazy, so I won't bother to do that. But I'll come back over here to my Visual Studio terminal, and I will type that command, pip install NumPy, and it's almost always for a basic installation, it's almost always the same, pip install and the name of the package. Before I actually run that, let me come up here and import NumPy the way I would any other package, and you can see that the interpreter is telling me it doesn't know what NumPy is. So that's how I know I need to install it. I kind of skipped a step there, but I'm going to go ahead now and run this installation of NumPy. And pip will have to download the files. And once it's downloaded them, it will install it. And it's only installing it into this .venv folder that I've got for this project that I'm working on. It's not impacting anything else. And once that's done and is finished being installed, now the interpreter recognizes what NumPy is, and I can use that just like any other package that I've imported. Let's try one more. Another popular package out there is called PyTest. Okay, and it's like a fancier version of unit test for those of you familiar with that. Once again, it doesn't recognize what that is, so I'm going to come down here. I could go look it up on PyPy first if I want. I just happen to know that this one is in there. It's called pip install. I'm going to run pip install PyTest. And once again, it'll have to download some files and then get that copied into my virtual environment and installed. And sure enough, now the interpreter recognizes that. The beauty of this is that these packages are, again, only being installed in this one folder. So I can import as much as I want. If there's all kinds of stupid stuff on PyPy that I just want to try, I can install it. I don't have to worry about it sort of interfering with anything else that I've done. And I can, if I want to start over, I can just close Visual Studio and delete that virtual environment folder. And actually, if I just in Visual Studio go and create a new one, I think it'll delete that old one for me in the process. But the point is, it's just a bunch of files in a folder. I can delete that folder, and I've got a clean slate. My recommendation is that you use virtual environments going forward now that you know how they work, and now that you might want to install some packages. If your workflow is that you open a folder for the entire course, like CIS 256, and then you create a virtual environment, you'll end up with one virtual environment for all of your subfolders, and that might or might not be what you want. If you open a subfolder specifically and then create your virtual environment, you should get a virtual environment that is just for that particular subfolder, whether that's a module or an assignment or whatever. So you can decide how you want to use that, but again, since it is a best practice and since now you are able to import packages and try them out, my recommendation is that you start using this. If you have any questions, as always, please just reach out.